Dixie here. Today I want to talk to you about trekking poles and specifically my all-time favorite trekking poles. I've been doing this backpacking and thru hiking thing for a little over 10 years now, and even though I've tried different trekking poles here and there, I keep coming back to the same pair. And those are the Black Diamond Alpine Carbon Cork trekking poles. I've had these since 2017 when I thru-hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, and for the majority of that time, I've mainly used them. Now, like I said, I've tried other pairs here and there, which I'll get into some a little bit later. So there are several reasons that I love them so much. The first being that even though they are carbon fiber, so they're really lightweight, they seem to be bomb-proof because I am not gentle on gear by any means, on anything for that matter, and they've held up really well over the years. I've seen other people have carbon fiber trekking poles that they've snapped, or even aluminum ones that they've bent along the way, but these have held up for me even when I almost impaled myself with them, or I kind of did impale myself with them, but thankfully not too bad. They are really lightweight and they are collapsible, which is a must for me. The locking mechanism on these trekking poles is a lever lock, which is also something that I really prefer to have in trekking poles. In fact, I'm probably gonna say I wouldn't buy a set of trekking poles that does the twist locking mechanism. I'd probably rather just have fixed trekking poles than having a twist lock mechanism. I've just seen those get loose more quickly than lever locks, and when they do, it's more difficult to repair. A lot of times the lever locks, when they loosen up, there's some kind of screw or something that you can tighten to make it lock in firmly so that you don't have trekking poles collapsing under your weight. Where the twist locks, it's a little bit more difficult to repair, and those just seem to give more. They seem to fail and collapse under the pressure of the user's weight more so than the lever locks. With that said, I have never had to tighten the lever locks on my Black Diamond trekking poles. The lever locks that I've had to tighten up were like a really cheap pair off of Amazon, but I would still prefer those to, like I said, the twist to lock. The only issue that I've seen with the lever locks on this specific set of trekking poles, like the Black Diamond Alpine Carbon Cork, not mine, but my mom's, there was a little plastic piece on the metal lever that broke off, but it didn't affect the functionality of the locking mechanism whatsoever. It was more just a cosmetic thing, if you will, or I guess just to cover the lock so that you don't have metal on your gear. I don't know. But for whatever reason, hers did break off, and so that's the only issue I've seen. Mine have never broke off, but like I said, she could go on using it just fine. My husband now owns a newer pair of the Black Diamond Alpine Carbon Cork trekking poles. I got him a pair of these when we first started backpacking together, and they've actually fixed the design where that plastic piece doesn't exist on the trekking pole locking lever anymore. So it's just metal, but it's kind of like a smoothed out metal piece. And so that isn't an issue if you were to buy a pair of them now. Another thing that I definitely have to mention about my Black Diamond trekking poles is I've never had to replace the tips on my trekking poles. I used a different pair of trekking poles on my Appalachian Trail thru hike, and in Maine, my tips on those were just like down to the nubs, so I had to get those replaced. That was a pair of REI trekking poles, and while they were decent poles, it is something that I had to worry about in the middle of my thru hike. Well, my Black Diamond trekking poles I've used for several thru hikes since then, including the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail, and I have never had to replace the tips. They're still ready to go for more miles. I also really like the cork grips because they don't get slippery if your hands get sweaty like you would experience with rubber grips or even foam grips. I will say that the only pair of trekking poles that I've ever used that came close to topping these Black Diamond trekking poles were a pair of Lecky poles, and they were the Micro Vario style trekking poles. They were made for women specifically, and these did have rubber grips on them, but they had almost like a suede like coating on them that made the grips really comfortable. So they were definitely more comfortable than the cork ones. I did not experience them being slippery or anything like that, but in general, they were good trekking poles, but I ended up having a pin come out of one of the locking levers, and I tried contacting Lecky and crickets for a response. So I was not able to find a replacement pin online. They didn't reach back out or, respond when I reached out to them. So I just kind of threw my hands up and gave up on those trekking poles. Because my black diamonds have never failed me, they are just my go-to. I don't want to, in the middle of a long thru hike or any backpacking trip, have an issue and then have to deal with that issue. I want the gear to just last. And the black diamond trekking poles have certainly done that. The only real wear and tear I can see on my trekking poles specifically, after using them for 8 years, is the cork grips do have like thumbprints in them from where my grip has slowly worn down the cork over time, but it doesn't bother me. In fact, I like it because I can pick them up in my hands and I know which one goes in which hand, and they just feel, fitted to my hands now. So it's not something I have a complaint about, but it is something that has shown in the way of wear and tear throughout the years. Also, the numbers on the poles themselves have been kind of scraped off over time, but it's still really obvious to me where I need to extend my trekking poles to fit my height, because it's worn to that spot. So that's not an issue for me. And I think that's pretty much going to happen with any trekking pole you have. So these trekking poles have just held up really well throughout the years. I think I still have a whole lot of life left in them. And these days they cost about $230. I paid 8 years ago about $170 for my trekking poles. And if I had to replace them for some reason tomorrow, they were stolen out of my vehicle or they got thrown off a cliff or something, I would have no issue paying $230, because I think they are worth every penny of that for the longevity you get out of them. So anyway, that is why the Black Diamond Alpine Carbon Cork trekking poles are my favorite. Again, I am not sponsored. Black Diamond has not reached out to me and asked me to do a video on these. This is just something that has been tried and true throughout my thru hiking and backpacking experience. So I like to share that kind of information with y'all, because backpacking gear is not always, super cheap. And if you're gonna put money out on a product, you want to know that it's gonna last you. So anyway, if you like these particular trekking poles or another set of trekking poles for that matter, please feel free to share that in the comments below, because people have different preferences, and so maybe cork grips are a deal breaker for somebody for some reason. So being able to read through the comments and see why people prefer what they like, that could be helpful for somebody. Thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to share this with a friend if you found this video useful, and we will see y'all next time.